Welcome to the Managed to Win podcast. Today I've got Igor on the show, but he's a startup addict, and he has a game that will teach you, your people, and teenagers how to be an entrepreneur. And he tells his story of his ups and his downs. I think he said he failed 18 times out of 20, and he doesn't tell all the stories. But this is a great podcast. You're going to hear some good information. It's inspiring. And then in the last part of it, you're going to learn about this game, Entrepreneurpoly, that is an amazing game that can change people's lives in positive ways, because entrepreneurship is a great way to go. Teaches responsibility, gives people independence, and can positively impact the lives of millions. So let's dive in. Igor, thanks for being on the show. You have, you call yourself a startup addict. So I can relate to that. So that's great. I also like the fact that you immigrated from the USSR to Australia at age 10 and then launched your first business at 17. So you've been going for a while. And I mean, one of the things I love about immigrants in America, you're in Australia, in America, is I just feel that, they come and they want to make a better life for themselves and their family, and they just go at it. So what's like one major or three major lessons you've learned through that journey?
It's a great question. And you're right, immigrants, and obviously after moving to Australia, then I moved to the US, to Texas, when I expand my business, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
But immigrants, whether in Australia or US or many other countries, I think there's a very strong dominant, what do you call it, a placement in the business world. Like a lot of successful entrepreneurs, a lot of businesses are owned or started by immigrants. And I think the simple truth of it is, as an immigrant, having come to Australia with, a couple of suitcases, $200, not even no English, like this is my second language. I think you have so little to lose that you're willing to do it, whatever it takes to succeed or to build a better life for your kids, which is what my parents did. And then obviously what I did and I am doing for my kids that I have now. I have a 10-year-old son and a 6-year-old daughter. And, we still have that sort of mentality of an immigrant where, you have to succeed so that you can build a better future for your kids. And I think it's a bit of an advantage that we have as immigrants. And there's a great quote. A friend of mine in the Entrepreneurs Organization at a meetup at like a dads that want to be great. So entrepreneurs that want to be great dads as well. He said, you can't fake poverty, right? Because you can't fake what you experienced as an immigrant coming with no money, no English to a new country. You can't fake that artificially for your kids. My kids are growing up in McMansions and, self-driving cars, right? It's a totally different thing. And so that's, I think you have to come up with different strategies, but as an immigrant, your advantage is that you just have nothing to lose. And so you're willing to try things. Whereas I think if you have things to lose, if you have, a reputation, or you feel that you don't want to be embarrassed in front of your friends, what will they think, whatever. You just don't have any of that as an immigrant. Say, hey, I don't have any friends, so I'm just going to do whatever. So, you have to get into an advantage.
Yeah, and I think that you brought it up. The kids today, so many of them are growing up comfortable.
Right.
And with digital devices that they can sit and look at all the time instead of chores.
Yeah.
And, if you're going to school, then I guess it's okay, but you don't have to strive for the best grades. And I live in the Sacramento area in California. We have really strong Eastern European population here. I think there's over 600,000 is what I heard.
Mm-hmm.
And
I've got a couple of friends there.
Yeah, very hard workers. We had a guy come out, and I'm not sure exactly where he's from, whether it was Russia or Romania, but to do some contractor work, on our house. And It's a good guy, came out, worked hard, gave it his all, gave us a fair price. And he had to use his phone to translate everything, but he's out there making it happen.
But isn't that a cool piece of tech? You can just talk to. I've had that plenty of times as well, where people come and they do work and they don't speak the language, but you can Google Translate it. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. He was just doing it live.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing.
And there was a hard work ethic. I'm going to do what it takes type of ethic for him. As a matter of fact, he brought a guy on when we had him do a little bit more work to help him. And he later said, oh, that guy just didn't do a good enough job. I said, well, he did okay. You need to train him a little bit more. You give him a little bit of slack. He didn't sit around and do nothing while you worked. He may not have done everything exactly the way you wanted. But anyway, about your journey. So I think this is really good. And the reason I'm interested partially in you had some great successes. Why don't you go through some of the successes you've had as an entrepreneur? And then I really would like to talk about this game you've developed and the potential impact it can have on just what we talked about. Kids growing up, not really understanding the game and the game of entrepreneurship, and I believe in when you're working for a corporation, you got to be an entrepreneur. I mean, I work for Black Point cybersecurity company, but I got to be an entrepreneur in that organization to be my best for the team. And so
I think the skills,
what you've gone through to get where you are.
Yeah, I think the skills translate so easily, and the entrepreneurial drive, and I think if you had that in a corporation, I think it would do extremely well. And just to make one more point about the whole immigrant story, I just want to add, because we went through this, so this is kind of one of the first things that I guess defined my journey, even as a kid. It took us 3 years, it took my parents 3 years and a lot of very, very hard work to get a permit to come to Australia. Australia's quite hard to immigrate to. And at the time, we were looking at America, but that was even harder. And so I think as an immigrant, if you come through the, currently, politically pointy topic, right? But, immigration, I think is great. But you got to think about all the people like us that went through all the hoops and just worked our butts off to get into the country. And that's kind of your first defining success, right? If you think about that journey, it all starts with you had to work your butt off to get in. And then you are going to, because it took so much effort to get in, you're going to do whatever it takes to make the most of it. And I think that is an interesting distinction when thinking about immigration of what's the difference between when you get it easy or easier versus when you've had to work your butt off. And even when I moved to the US, the visa that I got cost me, tens of thousands, $40,000 or something for the family.
Wow.
And it was a lot of, I had to spend a year preparing documentation and all of that. And so you just think about that process as what kind of people go through that process and succeed. I think it defines the kind of people that will eventually, in a high probability, not always, of course, but in a high probability will take that approach to starting a business or in their job or in their education. Does that make sense?
Oh, no. And I think we're on the same page. And I'm all in favor of legal immigration.
I think most people are.
Going through a process. Yeah. Maybe our process can be streamlined. Maybe it can be less costly, whatever. But going through a process of not only there's some type of background check, you're a safe person to come into the country, but then also going through a process that you want to adopt our culture and you want to be an American. You don't want to come here and do your own thing, or like in California, just come in and it's kicked back so the government can give you money to do nothing. And so we shouldn't go into it. But
no, it's a hairy subject, all right? So look, I mean, I'll tell you a bit of my stories. I've had some pretty crazy. I've started probably over 20 businesses, right? That's kind of my count. I've lost count, right? So many, but I've failed at probably about 18 of them. So I just want to have that off the bat. If any of your listeners or viewers are, struggling or thinking of this or that, whatever, this is the life of the entrepreneur. You just don't know which one will actually succeed. And in fact, the ones that have succeeded, my biggest success came from one of those, sliding doors, random moments where I never thought this is where I'd be. And the business ideas that I thought were going to be billion-dollar businesses, let's just say they went out in a whimper, not even a flame. And so that's an interesting, lesson that I learned all of my journey. But I started my first business was 17 in Australia. I had an interesting moment in the USSR when I went to sleepaway camp, and I'll cut the story short. I ended up selling water on the beach because there's no water fountains or vending machines. And I was about 7 years old. And when we got back from camp, my parents got into a lot of trouble because they were reprimanded for raising, and I quote, a bourgeoisie capitalist pig. Me. And I was quite proud of that title. I still am quite proud of that title. So I started my first business, at 17. doing websites and website development with databases. I was a super tech geek my whole life. Still am a little bit. And, did that for a while, but then, I went to college. I turned up once in a while. I managed to pass because I was too busy building a business. But my parents, being immigrants, they really wanted me to, get a real job, finish my degree, get a real job. And so I kind of let my business go, finish my degree, and went into the corporate world, into enterprise consulting, and ended up working for SAP, which is a big German software company out in Asia Pacific. I traveled around Asia, and then I read a book that changed my life. Actually, early on, just as I was starting my career, my dad's friend, whose name is also Igor, gave me a present, a book called Rich Dad Poor Dad. You may have heard of it.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And in fact, to be honest, shout out to Robert Kiyosaki, the Cashflow 101, that board game that I used to play when I was 19, 20, was the inspiration for me in creating my board game. So shout out to Robert. And I went through that, sort of that career path initially very quickly, climbed very early. But I wanted, having read the book and changed my life, I wanted to get out of the rat race. I read a second book, one of his advisors, called Real Estate Riches by Dolph DeRoos. He's a New Zealand guy. And I just followed the formula. And I started buying properties, buying, renovating, revaluing, and et cetera. And by 22 and a half or so, I was a property millionaire. I had 14 properties. And, I was climbed the ladder really quickly. But I was still kind of, funnily enough, I was still miserable. I was going through some depression at the time. And, money doesn't solve problems. It makes life easier, but it certainly, doesn't solve all problems, as we all know. And I basically got into self-help books, and I was like, I gotta get out of this job, to be happy. This is what the books told me. You gotta be an entrepreneur to get out of the jobs. And so I quit. And again, long story short, the bank that financed all of my 14 properties called my employer to check if I was still there. It was just a random thing they like never did. They did it once every few years, and it happened to be they did it a month after I quit my job. And so my whole portfolio collapsed like a house of cards. And I had, at the time, to be happy, invested in this marketing startup with 3 complete schmucks. And I was the fourth and the biggest schmuck because I funded the entire thing with the equity of my properties. And I ended up losing all that in a matter of 3 months. And so I was so broke. I tell the story sometimes. I won't go into it because it'll take too long. But I was down to my last, $2 driving up to Brisbane to try to, which actually ended up me starting another business in the SAP consulting space. But when I arrived in Brisbane, I had $2, just enough fuel to get to my friend's place that offered me to stay for free until I get on my feet. And I remember very distinctly that moment when I bought a can of Coke for $1.80, and all I had was 20 cents left at the end of it. That's all the cash I had, because I didn't eat or drink the entire trip up to Brisbane because I didn't want to run out of petrol. And then from there, I started this consulting business, and 4 years later, I built it to a 4.5 million revenue business, almost 5 million, and 22 staff. And that was from being 23 and a half, 24 to 27. And, I went from 20 cents to making, 50,000 a month. And then halfway through that growth, I gave, not sold, and this is a really clear distinction. So for all your listeners, remember this lesson. I gave 40% of my business to this couple that used to work for me, because I kind of figured out that I was good at sales. So I'm like, well, I can grow this bit. I can go and do selling, and they can do the delivery. And so I gave them the business, 40% of the business. And then 2 years later, when the business has grown from, when I gave to them, it was about 1.6 million in revenue. When I hit that peak at 4.5 to almost 5 million, 4.8 maybe, they decided that, they said to me that all I do is have coffee all day, and they do the real work. And I'm like, yeah, that coffee is called selling. And that's what brings in all these millions of dollars of projects and whatever. And they secretly started up a separate company. And on the 1st of January 2007, if I remember the dates correctly, could have been 2008, but I think 2007, they redirected all the revenue, or not all, 80% of the revenue. So it's still $3.5 million worth of revenue to their personal company, because they had friends in these, they made friends in these large companies. And basically I lost everything overnight, literally overnight.
Was this in Australia or the U.S.?
This is in Australia. This is in Australia.
Well, in the U.S., you'd have a recourse.
Well, yes and no. You probably would, but again, I was young and stupid, But I did meet an amazing mentor, and actually related back that some of these encounters that I had in my life, I actually have a card in the game called Encounters, because that's had such a massive effect on my career and my entrepreneurial life. I met a mentor who's still, I call her Mum 2.0. She's very close to me, an amazing woman, and she's a litigator. And she said, look, you could sue them, they'll go bankrupt, you'll get nothing. You'll end up spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in court. You can't sue the companies that they redirected revenue from are like some of the biggest companies in Australia, multi-billion multinationals. And so she's like, you're not going to sue them. And so she said, just take that energy and start again, like redirect your energy and start again. And, let karma take care of those guys, which is a rare thing for a lawyer to say. I know, especially in California, whenever I drive Californian highways, there's all these posters of, just sue everyone, right?
Don't get me started. I hate those posters. I don't own a gun, but if I owned a gun, I'd be blowing them out. Maybe, I don't know, but I hate.
Yeah, I know.
Hey, you can get something for nothing.
Exactly.
You don't take responsibility for your.
Her advice was very unlitigator-like, but it was absolutely spot on. And so I didn't end up suing them. I borrowed another $500,000 and started again, and just started rebuilding. And with in a year, I had some extra people in the team, and I managed to secure 3 really big contracts worth about $1 million combined to start 3 new projects with, again, 3, these are large multinational companies. And then this little thing in March 2008 happened, which you may recall, called the global financial crisis. And in 1 week, all 3 of those companies basically canned all of their projects. And so they canceled everything. So I lost everything again. And
so Igor,
yeah.
When in this journey did you get married?
So a little bit after that, this is me still like 27, 28.
Okay.
So I still have plenty of more crashes before I get married. And I know. And then, but the skill that I had, and this is again probably another lesson that I'd love to share with your audience, and it's a lesson actually I share with my kids all the time, is that there's one thing that you can never lose through all of that, and that is the skills that you have. It's this, right? Your mind, your heart, you can't lose that. And so whenever I would like blow up all my money and all my borrow way too much, and one thing I'm very proud of is I've never defaulted on debt. I've always paid off my debt. And the way I did that is I would go back into the IT world and get a job and work, start paying off my debt, and then go into another business and blow it out up, and then go back to the job and make some more money, and then try to pay. I did that about 5 times. And so because I had all these skills, I could end up getting a job pretty quickly. And I remember in one of my worst moments, about 2016, I fast forward a little bit, I'll come back. But I was nearly bankrupt. I was literally a week away from bankruptcy. And I had to downplay my experience, my resume, so I could get like a lower paying IT job because it was just available. It was like November before Christmas, no one's hiring. And this job was like pretty low level. And I'm like, I just need something. And so I ended up getting the job. And within 12 months or 14 months, I was 2 or 3 levels above the guy that hired me. Right. And because I had the skills, and I could use that. And I also had the skill of sales and influence, which is, in my view, the number 1 skill in life. So it's the first thing I teach my kids is how to sell. And so I would go back and kind of do that loop a little bit, so I could rely on getting a job, and not, it's never guaranteed, but I could do that to kind of climb my way out a little bit. And so when that business blew up, I went through very bad depression, obviously nervous breakdown. I have this. I think I say that I think resonates with many people, is that I've been to rock bottom so many times that I have a membership card, because I've just done this so many times. And I started a few more businesses, and but ultimately I went into working again. And I was working at Australia Post, managing their portfolio of technical projects. And a friend of mine, a good friend of mine who's a good golfer, Damon, he said, hey, come take some golf lessons. I'm like, no, it's for old people. He's like, no, come on. You'll enjoy. Anyway, so I went and had my first lesson, and I was hooked. And to this day, I'm absolutely obsessed with golf. And so this was about 2010. And the place we went to have lessons with this virtual golf center called Golf Tech Australia. And it had 6 virtual simulator bays and some lessons. And it was going out of business. And it was going out of business because the location was horrendous. It was a terrible location. And the building I was working in downtown had a ground floor, about a 6,000 square foot space that was completely empty. And so I'm like, what if we move that business to here? Because always, like I said, I can't just keep a job. I have to go start businesses, right? So we ended up buying that business for like next to nothing, moving it over, spending hundreds of thousands to refit the space. And we launched this indoor golf center. And it did okay, but I wanted it to be a passive income business. And while I worked my IT career earning, I was earning $200,000 a year or something. And so I'm just going to have this business passive. And of course, for anyone that's had a business, having a passive business does not exist. It's like the part of the end of a rainbow, or the tooth fairy, and a passive business. Those are in the same category. And so I had to quit my job again to work in the business. And I went from earning $200,000 to earning like $20,000 a year, which is all the business could afford to pay me. And that's when I got married, right? Because that's the perfect time when you're broke. And my wife, bless her, she comes from a very entrepreneurial family. They went the immigrants as well, started with nothing, ended up building one of the most successful jeans brands in Australia. Not as successful True Religion, but on a similar level in Australia. But her mom and her stepdad, but he was a gambler, so he gambled away that we know of $16 million at the casino, and ended up losing the business.
Whoa.
Yeah, and so they went from nothing to the top of the world to nothing. And so she kind of knew that journey a little bit, and she wanted an entrepreneur husband. And I still say to her, it's like, do you really? Are you sure? And but she's stuck now, so it's fine. We were married and we had our first child a couple of years later, and that was that changed my life. Cliche, but that changed my life a lot. And one of the things it did, it was a moment. Absolutely, you're right. But there was one particular moment when, this business was faltering, and I was nearly bankrupt at that moment I was telling you about before. And we'd go to the supermarket and we'd have groceries and diapers, scanning through the thing, and then we'd go to pay and we'd have no money. Didn't have enough money to pay, so we'd have to start taking things. And it was the most embarrassing thing I've ever, one of the most embarrassing I've ever experienced. And I had to put my wife through it. Taking things out of the shopping cart and rescanning it, and there's people standing behind us watching this happen, and I just wanted to sink through the earth. And I said, this I can't do this. I cannot put my family through this pain. It is not fair on them. And so it really changed my risk profile. It changed the way I would look at things. And when I got that first job that I was telling you about, not the first job, I'm sorry, the kind of low paying job, I said, I'm not quitting my job until the business is making so much money that it makes no difference. And I stuck to that. I quit my job when my business, my e-commerce manufacturing business, was doing $3.5 million revenue. Wow. And I was like, I still had a full-time job, and I had a whole team running this multinational, I had already a warehouse in the US. I was selling in Europe. I was manufacturing in China. I had a team and a warehouse in Australia, and I still had a full-time job.
And what were you making?
I was making the golf simulators. So Golf Tech Australia, kind of going back to that business, and it's interesting. So about 2 years, not even 2 years into that business, I got a call from the US, from this couple of guys, and it's like, I'm the founder of Golf Tech. Why do you have our name? Who the hell are you? Why do you have our name? And because we had the trademark for Australia. And I said, well, who the hell are you? So I'm like, whatever. I thought it was a spam call. But we ended up continuing to talk, and they came out to Australia. I came out to Denver. We tried to kind of merge the businesses and raise money in Australia, but raising money in Australia is a challenge. So it never happened. Long story short, when I left Golf Tech Australia, I sold my shares to my partners. I said, I'm out. I need to go and look after my family. But I did start another business, of course, called 24/7 Golf, which was the unmanned. So my idea was to create like those 24-hour gyms. You know those, right? You have those plenty.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm like, why don't we have that for golf? And so back in 2016, I may have opened one of the first in the world where you go, there's no staff. You go online, you get a membership, you put in a code, you go in, you practice golf, and you leave. So I started that, and first one did well. And I'm like, great, I'm going to open 300 of these, build an empire. And then I opened my second one, and the second one completely, I borrowed 100,000 from my parents, opened the second one, flopped completely. But as it flopped, I was like, I've got all this equipment, I need to sell it to try to recoup some money. So I sold it on Facebook Marketplace, and it sold really quickly. And I'm like, this could be good. So I bought a few more, sold those. And so then I'm like, oh, screw this, I'm going to shut down this venue, and I'm going to sell online. And so I did. And then I had to bring stuff in from the US, but it was very expensive. So I started manufacturing in China myself and opening the market here in Australia, and ended up growing that. And then later expanding to the US. And interestingly enough, when I expanded the US, so I was manufacturing the enclosures, the screens, the mats, all these accessories for golf swimmers. And I was reselling these kind of devices, the boxes that track the ball. And so one of the ones I was reselling is called SkyTrack. It's a very popular product, really amazing product. And Golf Tech, remember that guy that called me? They acquired SkyTrack back 3.5, 4 years ago. And the day they announced that acquisition, which was it took them probably a year to do the deal or something. But the day they acquired, he called me because I was pitching both Golf Tech and SkyTrack to sell my products as part of their online stores. And he said to me, hey, instead of selling your products, how about we acquire business? Because I owned the whole value chain, right? And I had a patent on the enclosures, and I built a bit of a name for myself. And, again, long story short, I ended up a year after moving to America, I achieved the dream, which is to sell my company. And they're owned by a public company. So, it was an amazing journey of selling to a public company, really, a publicly owned company. And it was the same guy that called me like 14 years prior, which is really funny. So lesson, don't burn your bridges. Unless you really, really want to burn your bridge. But
yeah, no, that's not a good plan. Amazing story. So talk to me now about this game that you're doing, because I've known a guy who tried to bring a game out. The game market is a tough market, and you're trying to bring out a board game at a time when, particularly in America, we could use more board game playing time instead of looking at a screen. I mean, the interactions that go on with a board game are so far superior to anything that's on a device.
You're right. And this is kind of what triggered me is, I've told you half the stories that I've been through. Like, there's so many more, but some of them require way more alcohol to share. But those stories, when I finally, succeeded and got over my, imposter syndrome, most of it, I still have it. But I thought, what allowed me to create that success? And it's the failures that led to it, which is ironic but true. And again, cliche, it was getting back up and learning and moving on. And it's like in a game, right? You can't go to the next level until you have your boss battle. And you may kill your character 20 times over before you learn the lessons. And that's kind of what happens in life. That happens when in entrepreneurship is, you hit the wall, you fall down. You got to get back up again, and you got to keep trying, and you got to keep going, and you got to learn from the lessons, and you're going to learn new lessons. And so I wanted to create a way to share those lessons that's more than just a book. I mean, I've written a couple of books, not about my journey, about sort of manifesting things that and a methodology behind it I believe in. But I devour business biographies. I love my favorite. I got two favorites. One is the Elon Musk book, and the second one is A Shoe Dog by the guy that started Nike. And there's amazing books, and there's so many others, but it's like it's a one-way street. Like you just, or you're a documentary, you watch a documentary, but how do you test yourself? How do you face the question of what am I going to do in this situation? What would I do in this situation? And that's when the idea for the board game came out, because I used to play Cashflow 101 back 20 something years ago. And so I took the kind of my lessons and my friends' entrepreneur lessons and the people I read about, and I thought, what if I create a game that you sit around a table, like you said, right? Not just, people ask me, are you going to make an app out of it? I'm like, absolutely not. I want you to sit there at a table, maybe with a glass of wine or a bottle, and to see what you're like and what other people are like, and what can you learn from each other, right? How do you make it? Because, being an entrepreneur sometimes is a very lonely existence. What's that phrase? It's lonely at the top. Well, that top could be rock bottom as well, right? It's lonely in both places. And so one of the things, I belong to Entrepreneurs Organization, which is an amazing global network of entrepreneurs, and things like that keep you going when you really need that. And so I wanted it to be social. I wanted it to have the lessons in there. And I wanted a way, and people ask me, how did you stay resilient? Where does that resilience come from? And I think it's like a muscle or like a callus, right? After a certain amount of iterations where you've just been punched in the gut so many times, you don't even feel it anymore. You're like, yeah, whatever, right? And I think that's what happened to me is that I just realized that all these things that you think are super important that stress you out are actually not that important and shouldn't stress you out. But how do you actually get to that? You kind of have to put the reps in, right? And so to me, this game is to allow entrepreneurs, whether they're kids or adults, it's actually more of an adult game than a kid's game, but it's really to allow them to practice what happens when you lose 100 grand. There's a card in there. You remember I was telling about encounters, right? Yeah. I had a great mentors. There's one guy I met who I thought was this going to be an amazing mentor. He had this tech company. He had a Ferrari. He used to race it, blah, blah, blah. I subleased my office for my company, my consulting business off him. He ended up being a con man, and he stole 100 grand from me, right? And so that card is literally in the game. It says you meet someone who you think is a great mentor, they ended up fleecing you for 100. What are you going to do when you're 100 grand down and you need to meet payroll?
Yeah.
Or you need to do this, or there's a deal comes up and you thought you had the money and now you don't. What are you going to do? And that's kind of the thinking behind the game is, how do you get your practice in to build those skills, to build that resilience without actually having to basically be down in the dumpster? Do you know what I mean?
And I don't think you've said the name of the game for the audience.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the name is a mouthful. It's Entrepreneurpoly.
Entrepreneurpoly, okay. And so I know you can play Monopoly for hours.
Yes.
How long does a typical game of Entrepreneurpoly last?
So it's a great question. It's about a 3-hour play and 2 to 3 hours. And you play with a balance sheet and an income statement. So it also teaches you financial literacy. And
which is great.
It teaches you, yeah, right. And it teaches you risk management, and it teaches you a lot of things that when I did the play testing before launching it, the feedback I got from the people testing it, they thought it was going to be more like Monopoly, more like gamey. And like, look, it's really hard. And like we're learning more about financial management and risk management than sort of deal making. I said, great, welcome to the real world. That's exactly what entrepreneurship is like. And the rose-colored version, that's a game. That's not real. So I was proud of that.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. So actually, there's a guy I'm inviting to our podcast. He heads up, founded a company called Evotech in San Diego, an IT and managed service provider, Cesar, and he talks about conscious capitalism, and he's just driven his company. And he mentioned on this other podcast that he has enough cash right now, and he has about 200 employees, I think, that if their revenue went to zero tomorrow, he would not have to lay off anyone for 4.5 years. Because he learned the financial side so carefully. And he mentions he had failures. I've had failures. You've had some, you've been candid. But I think it's actually great. So if it's teaching the financial side, how is it also fun?
I think gamification overall is one of the greatest ways to learn. In fact, there's so much research that shows when you gamify learning, the result is so far beyond anything else, any other way of learning, that it's been staring in our face, I think, for so long. I think the main fun part is you can experiment, right? You get instant feedback. So in the game, you can go and be, hell for leather, go take every risk and see what happens, right? Or you can be super ultra conservative, see what happens, right? Or you find your balance, what's right for you. Because I think, Tony Robbins says this, how you do one thing, you do everything. And so if you observe your own behavior, if you become a little bit more self-conscious, a little bit more self-aware rather, not self-conscious, self-aware of your patterns, your risk appetite, you may realize things about yourself that will help you succeed. And I certainly went through that process, sometimes the really hard way, especially after having, kids and being married and then being responsible and learning that I just can't do the things that I thought I could do because I had this, crazy goal. I wanted to be a billionaire by 30. I wanted to be this. I wanted to be that. Kind of all those things, all those wannabes, that don't really matter. And those big, big, hairy, audacious goals, and I love BHAGs. Don't get me wrong. I'm not dissing E-Myth, but to really succeed, what I've learned is it's the inputs. It's the little steps, and I actually call it, recently I came up with a name for it, which is the minimum viable step forward, right? What is the absolute minimum step you can do towards your goal and perfect that, and then the next step, and then and when you focus on that, the outcome, that goal that you have takes care of itself, because it's the inputs that drive the outputs, not the other way around. And we're, as a society especially, we're so just with all the, don't want to go down the social media, rabbit hole, but we are exposed to the outcomes so often that we forget that there's a whole journey that gets there. It's the overnight success that took 10 years to make. And I think people forget that.
Well, even if you look at some of the greatest business successes, like Steve Jobs, he went through a lot to get where he created the foundation where Apple could be where it is today. So if I'm playing Entrepreneurpoly, a lot of games, there's one clear winner and you're playing against each other. Am I playing against the other players, or are we all kind of competing independently?
It's like golf.
And everybody win.
It's like golf. You're playing against yourself. That's the only, you're playing against this. That's all that matters. Everyone can win. And in fact, one of the things I say in the rule book, and the rule book's quite comprehensive. In fact, I don't know if I told you, but I'm sending you a copy as a little thank you gift.
Oh, I'd love to have it. Yeah,
absolutely. And what you'll notice is, one of the things it talks about is success criteria is, like, we set a sample one for you, which this is kind of roughly, but really it's up to you. What do you want? And it's funny because that question, having a game where you set your own winning conditions, really challenges people.
Yeah.
I've had people that literally get stuck at that point before they even start the game, which is really funny. And again, what does that say about your mindset? To me, it's like, it's exposing you, it's holding a mirror to you about maybe something you need to work on before you go too far down the entrepreneurial journey. You have to ask yourself, what does success look like? How will you know you have succeeded? And I think that is a question that, for me, that changed, but like I said before, I thought it was, some number, like a billionaire or millionaire or this or that.
Yeah.
As I grew older, hopefully wiser, questionable sometimes.
It's a lifelong.
That success criteria has changed so dramatically. And for me now, and I'm happy to share it, for me, my success is freedom of choice. That's what matters, is that I choose to do the businesses that I want, that I love. I choose to spend time with my family that I love, and as much time or as little time as I want or they need, all of that. But having that choice, because if you're earning $1 million a salary, but you never see your kids, is that success? Is that really success?
Is that in the game?
That is in the game.
It's a game where I have to choose between family time and...
It's not you choose, but there are little hints throughout where, there is a job. You start off with a low-paying job in the game, and you have to make choices. I mean, the family stuff, but it's an interesting one, right? It's what does that look like? And my wife and I actually, every first week of the year, we do a really great exercise. I highly recommend it. I can't remember where I got this exercise. Maybe I came up with it. We write down, what's the ideal life look like for the year ahead, and then we actually cost it out. And when you cost it out, the one thing you realize, and we've done this for, 5-7 years. I've been married for 12. You realize that the things you think would make your life absolutely amazing don't cost as much as you imagine they do until you actually write it down.
Yeah.
And there's, we've done it with friends. Had some friends do this as well now that they've learned we do it. And they go, oh my God, it's literally like 1/10 of what we thought it would be.
Yeah.
So it makes it attainable.
It's interesting, going back to something you said, but I'm going to expand on it a little bit. I really believe the key is getting to know ourselves. Mm. And so many people don't do that. I'm farther along in life than you are. I'm still learning. Okay. But I went through, like, in my faith, I went through a 30-year stint where I was like checking all the boxes, but not growing in my faith. Mm. And I went through at least 30 years entrepreneurially, where I was not aware of myself. And I knew a little bit about my strengths, but I was blind to my weaknesses. Mm. And if your game helps people understand, take a pause, breathe in, and start to think about, like you brought up, what are my real priorities here? Then it can be life-changing, not just educational.
Absolutely. And that's the other thing is, you said it earlier, it's hard to bring board games out. You're right, it is. I don't see this as a board game. I see this as an education tool. It's a self-help tool, even though self-help sometimes has some questionable things, but that's a different conversation. But that's really where it is. It's just the board game is a means to the end, which is, how do you get your reps up? How do you get better at those things that you need to be good at? You need to be resilient to if you want to be a successful entrepreneur.
Yeah, and I would disagree a little bit with something you said earlier where you said all you have left is your skill set. I would say, number one, which you also said, by the way, all you have left are your relationships, because you talked about not burning bridges. You have relationships, yes. You have character.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
But I'm really struck. You send me the game, I'll give you feedback on it. You don't have to agree with it. But I'm struck that one market for you might be going after HR departments, that this is a game that could be used by employees to teach them life skills that will help them achieve their dreams that they don't have today, because they don't understand. Everybody thinks, I just need to go make more money. And when they get more money, they just spend it all.
Yeah, it's true.
How many cars today are on the road right now, which I never would have imagined, that have an $800 or $1,000 or more monthly payment so that I can drive a fun car now because I want it now instead of delayed gratification that our parents had. Yeah. So, there's tremendous things that could happen with your game. I'm excited about it.
Thank you. No, I agree. And it's funny you say the corporate world. So I did keynote speaking, and the keynote I have is actually takes the journey and the lessons I had and does make it more corporatized for those HR departments. And it really talks about creating inevitable success. And it's kind of a similar outcome from two different angles. But I agree with you. And the other thing I'm doing with the game, and actually I should mention this for yourself and for your listeners and audience, it's a semi-commercial venture. Big part of it is I want to give away a lot of these games to, I've been giving away to non-for-profits. I've been giving away to schools in Bali, Indonesia, in Africa, in India. And so, if there's any organizations you feel would benefit from it, non-for-profit or and I have a theory, like if someone wants it and they can't afford it, just send me a note. I'll send it to you for free. Like, it's not about, I've had my success, I've been very fortunate. So this is really a multi-tool for me where, I really do want to spread the message of the entrepreneurial skill set, to the world. And I was reading that there's an estimate to be 600 million entrepreneurs in the world, right? There's, a lot in the developing countries. And so I really want to get this out to, especially the developing countries, not just America and Australia, but a lot of places where people are very, very early on in their maturity and learning process of what it's like to be an entrepreneur. And I think that's where it could really help them. So if you know anyone for me to send it to, please send me a note after the show and I'll get it out to them.
Yeah, I think it'd be really good. I certainly could think of some people, but I also would encourage you to consider something that over the past year or so, I've come to realize that learning is what I call a 3T process. Mm-hmm. So you teach to transfer knowledge, you test to confirm that somebody can apply what they learn, and then you train or mentor until they achieve mastery. And you might think of, the entrepreneur organization as ideal one, to consider that, hey, you could use this game to teach your employees, your kids, your local school, or maybe you go into an impoverished neighborhood, but they don't just need the game. The game will sit on the shelf.
Yes.
They need someone to play the game with them and model it and teach them, and then it will have a major impact. And I think entrepreneurship can change the world. So this could be huge.
So two things I'm just going to absolutely agree on, and huge thank you for saying that. So two things. One is I always say entrepreneurial success is what drives the quality of life for humanity, right? All this Zoom thing we're doing, this camera, these computers, all this was in someone's mind, and they created it. It was that entrepreneurial drive that created it. So that is, I think, an absolute, like, a mantra that we should live by. The second thing I'll say is, it's funny you say that about that mentor person. My vision, and this is what happened with Cashflow 101 back 25 years ago, there would be a person that would run like a club, and they would be the mentor to all the people that come. And my vision is to have Entrepreneurpoly clubs all over the world, where the game master is someone who's kind of succeeded or has had the experience, and even if they haven't succeeded, if they haven't, whatever, knowledge, experience, but they can mentor. And people can come and they can share, and they can have someone that can guide them a little bit through it. So it's not just, they're not on their own. So I think that's a great point you made, and thank you for bringing that up. That's definitely my vision, is, longer term, is to have these Entrepreneurpoly clubs spread out the world. So hopefully it happens.
So there's a movie called Life of a King. Have you seen that?
I don't think I have.
It stars Cuba Gooding Jr. Came out in 2013. We saw it recently, my wife and I. And my wife found it, Kelly. And it is about a guy who's an ex-con, but he was taught chess in prison by a lifer who's never getting out. And he goes back into his old poor neighborhood, and he starts out as a janitor, but then he starts to become a teacher. And then I don't want to say the whole story, but the bottom line is, he starts a chess club for these kids.
Right.
To teach them how to anticipate things in life and how to play the game of life. And these have spread. I don't know how many.
Got some big names in this movie. I'm just looking it up.
Yeah, Cuba Gooding Jr. does a phenomenal job.
It's funny you mentioned chess. So I was the chess champion of my state in USSR when I was 9 years old. There's actually a chess set right there. So I still play a little bit. My father-in-law was the captain of the Australian chess team. So chess is a big part of. Listen, board games are they've been around for thousands of years. They can change humanity. I think it's a big statement, but I'm going with it.
Need to bring them back. So, Igor, anything you want to close on here? Entrepreneurpoly. People should check this out. They should learn more about it. They should go to your website. You can see it in the show notes. And but what would you like to say in closing to direct them somewhere, or to some final advice?
Look, I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if anyone wants to reach out, please find me. You can find the spelling of my name, which is almost as hard as Entrepreneurpoly. It's Igor Vainshtein. But if you can't spell Entrepreneurpoly, and sometimes I struggle, don't worry, we all do it. You can go to biz.game, biz.game, which will redirect, and check it out. And like I said, if there are organizations that you know of that could benefit from this, please reach out. I'd love to help them out, spread the message a little bit. And hey, thanks for the great chat. It's been really, really fun. And hopefully I know when you talk about your audience, I thought that was like a really perfect fit for the game, because I'm sure they're all going through some part of this journey that I've been on. And if this game or anything I say, or if they want to reach out to me personally, if I can help in any way, I think that's one thing you learn when you succeed as an entrepreneur, is you always had a hand that was reached down to you to help you lift you up. And when you get to that point, you actually realize how much you enjoy giving a hand to someone else that are going through that journey. And I think that's the cycle of entrepreneurship. That's a beautiful thing. And so I just encourage people to reach out, and we can go on this journey together.
Oh, that's great. No, I know my audience, and my audience is not greedy people. These are caring, loving people who are in the entrepreneur game because they love it, but they also looking to make a positive difference. So I'm sure some will reach out to you. But thank you so much for being on the show, Igor.
Thank you for having me, David. Really appreciate it.